convincing people that things are something that, other than what they really are, and they will continue to be. In the meantime, if you become a student of my work, a student of Professor McCanny, a student of Immanuel Velikovsky, Zechariah Sitchin, and others, you can learn the truth. The truth is, what we're experiencing is cyclical in nature. It's a long cycle, 3,600 years, and in human lifetimes, that's a lot of lifetimes, 3,600 years. You figure 4 generations per century times 36 centuries, that's a lot of centuries, that's a lot of generations. The cyclical nature of this planet going away from us for 1,800 years and coming back towards us for 1,800 years in a binary star system. I get emails from all kinds of people claiming they have photographs, claiming this, claiming that. It's natural to want to see this thing. 12 years ago, when I found out about it, more than 12 years ago, I began that quest myself. I came to realize it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if I see a photograph of it or not. Eventually, I will see photographs that are authentic, and so will you. Eventually, we'll see the real deal here in the Northern Hemisphere. By then, we'll be down to the final few months, if not few weeks or days, before all hell breaks loose. I encourage you to, now don't get caught up in a quest trying to find a photograph of the 10th planet of Nibiru. It's pointless. It serves no purpose. What you need to do is educate yourself about this cycle where every 3,600 years, every civilization on the planet gets mashed down to the mud. Lucas told that story quite well in his first DVD. It's mainstream archaeology, by the way. Very mainstream archaeology. And they offer no explanation. Mainstream archaeology offers no explanation for all the civilizations on Earth 3,600 years ago collapsing, coming to a halt. They don't. I know why. And when you educate yourself, you will know why as well.
Right. And what we found is that there are hundreds of such discoveries that indicate human beings like ourselves have been around for literally millions of years.
What's been the reception to this book?
Oh, there's been, from the spokespersons of the scientific establishment, there has been absolute outrage.
You referred to, in India, the Vedic literature?
Well, yes.
What is that?
I was saying in the beginning that we do take our inspiration from these ancient Sanskrit writings of India. They're collectively called the Vedas. Among them are the Puranas. Purana is a Sanskrit word. It means history. Now, these histories tell of human civilizations on this planet going back millions of years.
How do we know those are accurate?
Well, that was our question, too. Richard Thompson and I, we thought, well, if there's any accuracy to those statements, there must be some factual evidence to back them up. Now, when we looked in the current textbooks, of course, we didn't find any such evidence, but we thought, well, let's look a little bit further. Practically speaking, archaeologists and anthropologists have buried almost as much evidence as they've dug up. In other words...
Or perhaps overlooked? Cast aside?
Well, yes, cast aside. And there have been some outright cases of suppression where people who have reported such things have had their careers ruined.
You have talked in terms of the fact that scientists don't cheat. That's a myth. You say there's actual cheating going on.
Oh, that's very well documented. For example, the Piltdown case is a very famous case that documents that. Now, what that has to do with is early in this century, there was a purported discovery of an ape man in England based on a skull and a jawbone. And this Piltdown ape man, was in the science textbooks for about 40 years. And then suddenly it was revealed that the British Museum had tested these fossils and determined that it was a very elaborate hoax. And many people have speculated about the identity of the person who was the hoaxer, and practically all of them center on different scientists in England, such as Sir Grafton Elliott Smith or Sir Arthur Smith Woodward, all very well-established scientists in England, because only somebody who knew the scientific method very well could have prepared these fossils in such a way that they would have fooled the scientific community all around the world for 40 or 50 years. So some scientist who wanted to perhaps give some evidence in favor of evolution, because there's not very much of it, invented this ape man, and in a very sophisticated way cheated, literally. And this is admitted by the scientists themselves. And there are more examples I could give, and we document many of them in our book, The Hidden History of the Human Race.
Myth number 3, Michael, that you have written, evidence that goes against human evolution is reported only by crackpots.
Now this is one of the standard techniques that the scientific community tries to use against anybody that reports something that goes against their ideas. They try to label them in a derogatory way without actually discussing the facts.
This human person who looked like us, existed millions of years ago, did not evolve from an ape, as we are led to believe in the Darwin theory. Why has this evidence been suppressed, and what kind of evidence have you found to support this?
Well, I'll give you a very good example. Now, one example from historical times is during the California gold rush days, miners were digging tunnels thousands of feet into the sides of mountains. Now, the rock in these mountains is over 10 million years old. So when they were digging these tunnels, they were finding human skeletons, they were finding mortars and pestles, hundreds of them at dozens of locations. Now, all these were gathered together, reported to the scientific world by J.D. Whitney, who was the state geologist of California. And he published a massive book about them by Harvard University. Harvard University was the publisher. Now, what happened to these artifacts? Why aren't they on display in museums? Why aren't our children taught about them in schools? There was a very powerful anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution named William H. Holmes. And he said to Whitney, you, Dr. Whitney, if you had understood the theory of human evolution as we understand it today, you would have hesitated to announce your conclusion, namely that human beings existed millions of years ago, despite the imposing array of facts with which you were confronted. In other words, simply because the facts didn't fit the theory, the facts had to go, and so did Professor Whitney.
What possible advantage would there be in that?
Well, power, prestige, money, there's a lot riding on it. If even one of the hundreds of cases that we document in the hidden history of the human race were found to be true, accepted, that would mean that everything we've been told about human origins and antiquity for the past 150 years is simply not true. And I don't think that the current establishment is ready to admit that.
How long ago do you think that this evidence was suppressed? I mean, is this something that's been going on for years and years?
Yes, this has been going on for about 150 years.
Well, gee, don't we have all these machines now that can look at the footprints or the bones or whatever, and that will just tell us how old it is?
Oh, this is a very common perception. We have such faith in technology and those who employ it that when we hear about things like carbon-14 testing or potassium-argon testing, we think it really is a very simple process, almost like you pop something in the microwave and boom, it comes out. It's not like that at all. These are very complicated procedures. What I found in practice is that scientists may run several tests on the same piece of bone. Some of the ages will be very great, some very small, and they will tend to pick the date to publish in their scientific literature that most fits the idea that they start out with about how old the fossil should be. Now that often happens. We've placed spokespersons from the scientific community on a little bit of a pedestal, and we may need to give them the same sort of treatment that we would give to spokespersons from other groups in society.
I'm here, and doggone it, I want to get the information out. I want to get at the truth. I guess that's what it is.
Why does Dr. Steen McIntyre feel the need to protect her artifacts from her more mainstream colleagues? Why are contradictory findings being met with contempt instead of excitement? Some researchers charge it's because these new findings would turn modern anthropology on its head.
This is actually the subject of a presentation I shall be making in New Delhi to the World Archaeological Congress called Puranic Time and the Archaeological Record. And the concept of time that you do find in the Puranas is, in fact, cyclical. Now, what might one predict from that? Say if you have civilizations coming and going over vast periods of time, perhaps you might have humans and other ape-man-like creatures coexisting. I will mention that the Puranas do talk about intelligent races of ape-like creatures that use stone tools. This is not an idea that came in with Darwin. It's been there for thousands of years. Now, what might one predict from that? If you were to predict what archaeologists might find, you would say, well, they would tend to find a very bewildering mixture of anatomically modern human fossils, ape-man-like fossils, crude stone tools, articles indicative of a higher level of culture, all sort of mixed up and going back. I think you might also predict that given the biases of investigators towards a linear progressive idea of time, with things beginning in a very simple state and progressing in a linear fashion to a more advanced state, that they might edit that record to conform to their linear progressive biases.
With stories of their cosmology, their cosmogony, their history, where we came from, how the solar system formed and all that. And that's what we're going to go over, what they had to say. Where did it come from? Well, originally when these things were being translated in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the translators would read what they'd have to say, it was like, oh, come on, forget about it. Put them in the myth. These are myths. They have to be myth. It can't be true. And they put it in the myth pile, which Alan was talking about, myth. So, Zechariah Sitchin, a man named Zechariah Sitchin in the 1950s gets the idea, wait a minute, how does the first culture get a myth? Who hands it to them? Good question. Why didn't anybody else think of that? So, he assumes it has to be a history. They have to be telling a history, which then later gets distorted perhaps as myth by later cultures, but the first one's got to be a history. So he goes into the myth pile with that attitude and comes out with 8 books at this point called the Earth Chronicles series, which I use as the basis for a lot of what you're going to see here now for a while. Okay, we're going to go over what the Sumerians had to say, boiled down. Part 4 of my book is Asteroid Belt, where there should be a planet, and there isn't. But there was Tiamat then, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto as a moon of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and into that forming solar system at around 4 billion years ago, which we extrapolate and assume because all of them were still very plasmid, still very much lava-ish, able to pull moons out of themselves, and we know that the solar system formed at around 4.6 billion years ago, so at around 4 billion years ago would have been the time approximately when this would have happened. Okay. Nibiru comes in, and as it's a stray planet like the one we saw a few months ago being slung out of the binary star system on the news. We all saw that. Probably something like that. It's captured by the gravitational pull of the large outer planets, swung around the sun, captured by the sun, and is caught in an elliptical orbit like a comet, moving clockwise as opposed to the counterclockwise circles of the other planets. Well, as you can see, there's the capacity for real problems here with one going one way and one going the other. And in the second time around, Nibiru collides head-on with Tiamat at planetary speeds. This is a collision. Okay? Next slide. This whole thing now is described in the great Sumerian epic of creation called the Enuma Elish, which is 6 tablets of action, 1 tablet of summation, which is taken to be by many people the basis for the 6 days of creation and the 1 day of rest. Because much of the Old Testament is a direct come down from the Sumerians. And if you know the Sumerian history and you read your Sitchin, you will know that, or my stuff, you will see that that is the case. Now, in that great epic of creation, the Enuma Elish, six of the major puzzles of modern astronomy and Earth geology are, I think, plausibly answered. You heard Alan's interpretation of some of it. I'm going to give you mine and give you the basic Sitchin explanation. Okay? What they say is that in the collision, Nibiru slams into Tiamat. It is a little more held together. It's older, and so it is coalesced more. It holds together. Tiamat is shattered in two, blown apart, torn in half. And that the lighter outer crust, the crust with the water on it, is scattered in all directions. Boom. Just an explosion, the lighter crust, and goes off with the water. Now, one of the great mysteries of modern-day astronomy is comets. Comets make no sense for this reason. They come from all over the place. In a linear universe, when, the great ball of a primordial cloud of dust and gas swirling around flattens out into a pancake to make the solar system, that's the ecliptic. Everything formed in the ecliptic should be in the ecliptic. Nothing should be out of the ecliptic, and yet comets come from all over the place. So they had to be removed out to where they are some kind of way, but we don't have any idea. So they come up with this fantastic thing called the Oort cloud, which is so far away you can't imagine. The Oort cloud is one of the biggest jokes out there. And that's how they explain comets, because they can't explain them any other way. But the problem with comets is they have water in them. And anything out in space is not going to produce water. You produce water by being a cooling planet with lava spewing up the steam and stuff like that, and it condenses, etc. So comets have to begin in a planet. Now, this explains it, I think, plausibly well. Nothing that they will throw at you to explain comets will do it. All right. Number 2, the other great mystery, the asteroid belt. What they say is that the inner viscous magma inside Tiamat in the collision was strung out the bowels of the planet. The guts were ripped out and strung out and broke into little pieces. That's the asteroid belt. They called it the hammered bracelet. We call it the asteroid belt. But there it is. And that's a fairly plausible explanation for it. Again, this doesn't make sense because, as you heard, the exploded planet theory. Problem is, when a planet explodes, it ought to just go boom everywhere. It shouldn't be hanging around. Doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. Okay, now, the third one is Pluto. Pluto's a problem because it's, as you've all been hearing lately, they're trying to downgrade it. It doesn't belong. It doesn't fit. It has an orbit that's not like the others. It carries inside the orbit of Neptune, and it's 17 degrees off the ecliptic. Again, nothing should be off the ecliptic. What they say is that Nibiru, as it swung around, it pulled Pluto away from Saturn, its original home, and dropped it out where it is now. Now, all astronomers know Pluto is not a natural planet. It started life as a moon of an inner planet. They know that. But they have no idea how it could have gotten moved out to where it is. Here you go. Here's the reasonable answer right here. Now, let's talk about Earth. 3 great mysteries here. Life. Well, first of all, let's establish that Earth is a remnant of this. What happens is Nibiru's moon bangs into the remnant of Tiamat, and like pool balls, boop, hitting, knocks it inside the orbit of Mars, and it reestablishes there and becomes the Earth. the remnant of Tiamat. Now, Earth has one great mystery is life. How did life come to be? Life appears, despite what you're told about the lightning bolt into the primordial soup and all that, forget it. That's just a joke. That's just a fantasy fairy tale to tell people that don't want to know the truth and to tell kids in school. That's what they're teaching to this day. We know very well that the first forms of life to appear on Earth appear suddenly. They're very sophisticated bacteria, prokaryotic bacteria, and there's not one, there's two kinds, and they appear at around 4 billion years ago. Suddenly, overnight, strata with two kinds, sophisticated bacteria, relative to what that first living form would have been. If I had done the first part of my show, you would see all that. Okay, you can get the tape or get one tape and put it in a room and let everybody see it if you want to. But anyway, the point is, life is a great mystery. How it would suddenly appear 4 billion years ago, here you go. It says in the tablets, in the collision between Nibiru and Tiamat, in the mingling of their waters, Nibiru passed life to Tiamat, to the remnant of Tiamat. Perfect explanation for the sudden appearance of two sophisticated life forms on the remnant. Now, the remnant now is over here with its moon Kingu and has gone over, and now we're looking at two major differences in Earth and all other astral bodies out there. Earth is missing a huge portion of its crust, and it has plate tectonics, movement in the plates. How could that happen? No explanation. Why? Because in the vacuum, any liquid in a vacuum, what does it do? You see it in the space shuttle all the time. They let orange juice or milk. It makes the smallest, tightest ball it can make. That is what a liquid does in a vacuum. Smallest, tightest ball it can make.
It was painted in 1350. This one was interesting to me. Very interesting to me. And these people are all looking up. And there's a great group of people. And they're all looking up at this big ship or city in the sky. And it might be this guy saying, hey, that's us. To these people here. I don't know. And that's where these things are supposed to come from. These Vimanas and stuff. The blue people. And there's a lot of documentation on this.
Geminid meteor shower is subsiding now, as Earth exits a stream of debris from rock comet 3200 Phaethon. Preliminary counts by the International Meteor Organization suggest that the shower peaked on December 14th with more than 100 meteors per hour. Bright moonlight reduced the visibility of many faint meteors. Fortunately, the shower was rich in fireballs like this one. Amateur astronomer Thomas Ashcraft recorded the fireball using an all-sky camera and a 61 MHz radio receiver. Watch the movie again and turn up the volume. The soundtrack is the echo of a distant TV transmission bouncing off the ionized trail of the disintegrating meteoroid. By listening to the radio echoes, I could tell there was a strong display of meteors all through the night, says Ashcraft. We were lucky that some Geminid fireballs appeared through holes in our cloudy skies. The shower is subsiding, but it's not over. Earth will be inside the debris stream of 3200 Phaethon for some days to come. Look west during the magic hour before sunrise, and you still could see dozens of Geminids between now and December 16th.
When the dust settled, here's what we had. The solar system as we know it today, with Nibiru moving in this clockwise 3,600-year orbit, and I say it passes outside the orbit of Mars, inside the inner edge of the asteroid belt, and the last time through, I think, was around 200 BC, which means it's just past aphelion out here, and it's going to be back around 3400 AD, about 1400 years. We don't have to worry about it if I'm right. You will get arguments about these dates. Some people use textual interpretations. I use the date of the ending of the Ice Age, which I believe was caused by Nibiru passing through and lifting the tides. You can read about why I think that in the book. And I use the dating of the ice cores and the tree rings of science. I try to make my work as scientifically based as I can because I expect someday to be able to go toe-to-toe with those guys, and I want to be able to do it on their turf in their terms. Okay? So, next slide. All right. This is some of the proof for that story that you've just heard, and it starts with cylinder seals. And I just want you to see what a cylinder seal is. There are about 5,000 of these that we have. They're with their printing press. It was just a thing they would roll out on the clay to leave little pictures like this. Now, when they had a story to tell, they told it in the tablets like you saw. But when they had an event that everybody would know the event, like I showed you that cartoon, and everybody here, we all knew in a very small space that was talking about millions of words and thousands of volumes about evolution. Am I right? We all knew. Well, they would all know this was the story of the time the gods or whoever gave the water to the water buffalo or whatever. The point is, notice the fine detail in the best of the cylinder seals, and then realize that these are basically 2 to 3 inches high. They're like big spools of thread. Made out of precious and semi-precious stone, carved in a circular format so that they roll out flat and three-dimensionally. Now, when asked how this was done, science says, well, they could only have bored little holes into the rock and then abraded them out like they, to the degree that they wanted. Well, the sand would be bigger than the holes you need to do this. Some of this work anyway. There's just no way. Lasers, this is not even an inch square here. Lasers would have a hard time doing this if they could do it. Nobody knows how they did this. They're just pulling one out of the hat on you. Okay, next slide. This is the one I want you to see. This is a much older one, much more worn, as you can see. 4,500 years, 4,500 years, 2,500 BC. It's VA 243. It's in a museum in Berlin. It's well dated. And it's called the granting of the plow. This is a seated God. See him in his chair with a plow in his hand. And this is a standing God, and this is a human. How do we know they're gods? Because they have horns on their helmets. Horns on their helmets. Notice the horns. This is how you signify gods, or they did anyway, the Sumerians did on their cylinder seals. And I want you to pay special attention to this because later at the banquet we might see a real live Anunnaki helmet. We might see that. Okay, now, normally they would put astronomical signs up here to indicate who the god was because not everybody would know. But in this one, obviously everybody knew. And as you can see, this the human is carrying this kind of skunky old digging stick that the most primitive people have, even to this day. And this new wooden plow here, 4,500 years ago, we can go to Egypt today and see this very plow, and in many other third world countries still being used, this very plow. Okay, so no question it's the granting of the plow. But this is what makes this special right here. Let's see a blow up of that. What is this? Solar system, right. Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, in their relative sizes, mind you. Earth, Moon, think how small that is. What grain of sand dug that out? Mars, and then, what should be here? This should be the asteroid belt. This is Nibiru, folks. Nibiru. Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto as a moon of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Notice that it's only a little bit bigger than Uranus, Neptune. It's about 3 times bigger than Earth. Nibiru is a good-sized planet. Good-sized planet, according to this. Okay? Now, again, what proof do we have of any of this? Let's take a look at this. All right, here's a look at the solar system that you don't get to very often. And did it occur to any of you that we were looking at a cylinder seal carved at 4,500 years ago that had Uranus in it that we only discovered in 1781 when our telescopes got good enough to see it? It had Neptune, when we discovered in 1846 when our telescopes got good enough to see it, and Pluto, which we discovered in 1930 when our mathematicians got good enough to tell our astronomers where to look for the thing because it was so small. What are the Sumerians doing knowing about that? Furthermore, what are they doing writing in one of their tablets that if you look at these two, Uranus and Neptune, in the heavens, meaning right out on them, they look like blue-green watery twins. When we didn't find that out, we thought they were just big old gas bags like Jupiter and Saturn until Voyager went out there in 86 and 89 and found that, lo and behold, they really are blue-green watery twins. What the Sumerians said 4,500 years ago. Furthermore, they didn't count the way we do. Earth was not the third rock from the sun for them. It was number 7. So that means they were counting from out here, and they were putting Pluto in its correct place. What are they doing with all that knowledge? Well, they make no bones about it. They say everything that we know, everything that we are, everything that we have comes from the people living on Nibiru. The people living on Nibiru came to Earth and gave us everything that we have, everything that we know, our great culture. Now, what's the proof of that? Is there any proof that any ancient advanced civilization was ever on Earth at any point in the dim or distant past? Yes, yes. The megalithic structures out there, the pyramids, Tiwanaku, Baalbek, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, you name it, a couple of dozen of them. All of those are impossible for human beings to recreate.
So we're in dire straits, according to these people, and they want to do things such as fly military planes up there to spray sulfuric acid into the stratosphere, which is the uppermost parts of the sky. They want to coat the sky in sulfuric acid to reflect the sunlight away to cool the planet down. And why would they want to? Here comes the emergency part. There's a group called the Arctic Methane Emergency Group right here. Their website is ameg.me, ameg.me. The Arctic Methane Emergency Group is a group of scientists who have been studying the Arctic ice and methane and are, basically blowing the whistle. They're saying that at any moment, 50 gigatons. That's a lot. I don't know exactly how much, but that sounds like a whole lot. Gigatons. So that's millions of tons, I imagine. Or billions of tons, excuse me. So 50 billion tons of methane could be rapidly released at any moment. And just for those who don't know what that would do, it has like 10 times the heating factor of CO2. So when that methane were to be released, if what they say happens, the weather would go insanely crazy. It would be the hottest temperatures ever on record, and there would be massive storms. Biblical stuff. So pretty crazy stuff. Might
have a tough time up in there. But the point is, they've got it pretty much done. They're working on the spire here when they break it. You know how it works. You press here, you get this. Well, look, does this look like somebody chipping away with a little hand? No. This looks like a belt sander taking pieces out the size of the chair you're sitting on. Huge chunks of pink granite, one of the hardest stones in the world, just being ripped out. And they press too hard with whatever machine they've got here, and you know your physics, you get stress back here, and they popped it, they broke it. And they just said, whoops, we busted that one. And they just unhooked it and went somewhere else and left it for us to marvel at and wonder how they could have done it. But now let's go ahead and say they didn't bust it and they finished it. These primitive people now who managed somehow to do this. They finished it, it's ready to go. The hole, by the way, is about 15 feet deep. That's the top of it up there. But still, what's the first thing they've got to do? Somebody's got to draw straws to get down there with his hatchet and cut it loose from the bottom. Now, who's going to do that with 1,100 tons sitting on top of him? We could not get our best diamond-tipped blades to cut through underneath this thing. The weight would stop the blade. We could not, the operative word here is impossible. We could not get this out of here. And yet they did it time and time and time again. To lift it out, just if we could somehow cut it loose, we would have to take a dozen of our largest movable cranes to wring that hole just to get it up. You're being lied to, folks. That's the main thing you got to understand. You're being lied to. It's absolutely impossible for this one stone proves that none of the megaliths were made by those people in that era. And this, again, is not the biggest one. They have them in Baalbek twice that big. Okay? Next slide. All right. What we're told is that the Anunnaki came to Earth for this, gold. Mining gold. And that originally the story is they landed in ancient Sumer, but not 6,000 years ago, 400,000 years ago, 430,000 approximately to be exact. 400,000 years ago they land in modern-day Iraq, and they set up shop in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and they call their home away from home, their home away from Nibiru, the Eden. You'll see a poster out there by my thing, Anunnaki over Eden. That's what that means. Because that poster is the Tigris River Valley that the symbol is rising above. That is where it was. That is where Eden was, according to them, and that comes down in the Bible as such. So they set up camp and they placer mined the gold out of those rivers. What do they need gold for? They needed to repair their atmosphere. And their rise to high technology, they had damaged that big, 3 times the size of Earth atmosphere, the same exact way we're damaging ours in our rise to high technology. And they ultimately had to repair it with very fine particulates of gold, like talcum powder, blown up into the stratosphere above it so it would ride above there and act as a reflector and an insulator from cosmic rays, which is, you see that on the masks of astronauts and in the capsule and all that. Gold is a wonderful stopper of cosmic rays. So that's what they had to repair it with. It's what we will have to repair it with. We'll have to do exactly the same thing when the day comes for us to have to face up to what we're doing to our planet. Okay? So they came, they placer mined out of the river, and all that is you put a tray in the water, you let the water sweep over, the water drops the gold into these cloth. Every few weeks you pick it up, and it's real easy. It's the way we do it now when we have the opportunity. But you tap out any stream system, ultimately, and they did. After about 150,000 years, they had tapped it out. And so they decided they were going to split themselves up and go where the mother lode of gold was on the planet Earth, which is what it is today, southern Africa. So they divided themselves into the upper world, which remained the Eden, and the Abzu, which was the lower world, and you didn't want to go to the lower world because you had to get in the holes and dig the gold. And they didn't like it. So the Anunnaki revolted. They said, we don't want to do this. We want a slave to do this work for us. Plus, it was a hardship duty, mostly men. Why don't you make us some women while you're at it? So that's what they did. They decided to use the creatures of Earth, which would be the hominoids, and I say it would have been the Almas, the likeliest candidate. They took the creatures of Earth to get some of their genetic material to make the new slave better adapted physically to the planet than they were, but the slave would for the most part be like themselves. We shall make the Adamu, A-D-A-M-U, which comes down as Adam, and we shall make the Adamu in our own image after our own likeness, which comes down word for word. And that is what they did. They made their slave inferior models of themselves. That's us, folks. That's us. We're really inferior models of the Anunnaki. And as you saw in the cylinder seal, we look like them. We look like, in their own image after their own likeness. In all of the cylinder seals, we look just like them. We don't have the horns on our headgear. That's about it. We are them. That's why we're not adapted to this planet. That's why we're so obviously not a part of this planet. We have their bones. We don't have primate bones. We have their muscles. We don't have primate muscles. We have their skin. We don't have primate skin. We have their body pattern, their hair patterns on their body is ours. We have thickest on our front, thinnest on our back. Primates have thick on the back, thin on the front. We have their eyes, their poor night vision eyes.
Hundreds of giant aliens unearthed near an African village. Upon the discovery, village elders urged the people to flee, and some women fled, clutching their infants. There's pictures here. But the African find is only the latest in a string of alien body discoveries stretching back some 70 years. China's strange alien bodies, it seems, if anthropologists and archaeologists dig hard enough, deep enough, and long enough, sooner or later alien bodies will surface. And 1937 was a banner year for alien corpses in China. That was the year several scrawny alien cadavers were allegedly discovered. All had huge heads, and buried in caves nearby were mysterious discs that came to be called Drapa.
Like these beings to kind of be part of that line as well. And who do you think they were? They were like the kings and the royals of that area?
Well, they definitely were the royal family of the area, because the tombs that they've been found in have been rich in very incredible ornate tapestries, fine ceramics, etc. And that's typical anywhere in the world where you find royal tombs. You tend to find very nice artifacts, whereas a farmer's grave will tend to have not much in it. So we do know that they were of a royal class. Part of the mystery is that when the Nazca take over the area, which was about 100 AD, all of a sudden the elongated skulls disappear from the archaeological record. They're not really found that much amongst the Nazca tombs. And so it's my beginning of a theory that I think the Nazca, in fact, eradicated the royal family of the Paracas for some reason. But I can't understand why you wouldn't find the Paracas in the archaeological record once the Nazca take over. However, when we look, the thing is that this phenomenon existed all over Peru, and also in the area of many parts of Bolivia, including Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and other sites in Peru where you find megalithic structures. I'm starting to find direct correlations between megalithic building and the presence of elongated skull.
That's the key to this. We have their brains. That's why we're not like anything else on this planet. We are them. We are genetically engineered copies of them. Okay, next slide. Let's take a look at how that was done. Human body contains 100 trillion cells. There's a nucleus inside each human cell except red blood cells. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. One chromosome of every pair is from each parent. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that contain instructions to make proteins, the building blocks of life. This is where genetic engineering takes place. Now, we're going to go over it lightly, but it's very important. I want you to understand these things that I'm going to tell you now. Okay, next slide. Don't worry about the details and how they do it. This is what they do. They can open up a cell, our genetic engineers can, our geneticists can. We can open up a cell, open up the nucleus, pull out strands of DNA, and in that strand, 98% of it will be what's called junk DNA. We don't know what it does. If it has a function, we don't know what it is. 2% will be what are called, prosaically enough, the working segments. They work. They do what they're supposed to do. They make the proteins. Now, if you cut in the junk above a working segment and in the junk below and remove it and have done the same with another strand of DNA over here, you can move anything into anything else. It can be animal into plant, plant into animal, fish into fowl. It does not matter, because all living things at the most fundamental level are exactly alike. Understand that. We're all made of the same 4 base pairs, the same 20 amino acids. Everything's the same at the most basic level. It's like it's pop beads that are interchangeable. It is almost as if somebody designed it that way so they could just mix and match the parts and make anything they wanted. Isn't it? Something to think about. Okay, but the problem with it from an engineering standpoint is this. You're not cutting with a blade. These are not precise cuts. The blade would have to be a few molecules thick. You're cutting with chemicals. Chemicals. Now, the chemicals can cut pretty accurately, but mistakes are going to happen. Something's going to ooze out where it doesn't belong. Something's going to splash over it where it doesn't belong. Mistakes are going to happen. Inevitable. We know that. We make mistakes all the time. Another problem with genetic engineering is you don't know what you're going to get when you do this. You can't predict. You have to decide what you're going to do. You have to do it. You have to let it express, which is live, and see what you get. Proofs that I say indicate very clearly that we are, in fact, what the Sumerians say, a genetically engineered species by the Anunnaki. Next slide. Okay, here we go. The cerebral cortex is the deeply convoluted surface region of a brain that is most strongly linked to intelligence, lower right. It's the stained part out here. If you peel that off of the brain of a rat, it will cover a postage stamp. Peel it off of a monkey, it'll cover a postcard. Peel it off a chimp, it'll cover a sheet of typing paper. Peel it off of us, and it'll cover 4 sheets of typing paper. Now, you can see this is a transition. This is clearly a transformation. Now, there's some weird things about it. These guys are using all they've got. All they've got. We're using 1/2 of one page in a very different way than they are using what they have. 1/2 of one page. How do we know? We all know. We use about 10% of our brains. We know that from the studies done with idiot savants. You know that. And we know there are thousands of miles of neural network in our heads not being used. We don't know why. We don't know why. I'll tell you why. We shall make the atom move strong but not too strong, smart but not too smart. They sealed it off genetically at the 10% mark or wherever it is. We don't know exactly where it is. But wherever it is, they sealed us off. You don't want your slave to be anywhere near as smart as you. You, in fact, want your slave to be so decidedly inferior to you that you never have to worry about treating it like a slave. So they engineered us to be really clever to ourselves, but for them, we were smart enough to talk, take instructions, act with a little bit of ingenuity and self-reliance. They could turn things over to us and kind of let us take over and do it. They gave us just enough to be wonderful in our own eyes, but be pond scum relative to them. It's what they did. So, it's pretty clear in as much as that, and now understand with the idiot savants, for those of you that don't know the proof about this, idiot savants get some beam of light in the damage to the good 10. They get some beam of light and it will strike somewhere in the other 90%. You all saw Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, remember? Well, they get it in math, they get it in music, they get it in sculpture, art, whatever, wherever it strikes. Now, if there's just one, we could say, well, that's a freak of nature. But we've had lots of them, lots of them. So we know that all of this is out there. It's in our heads. We just can't access it. We just can't use it. But if it wasn't in our heads, it wouldn't be in their heads. So we know that it happened. They have no idea how. Well, I say that the Anunnaki did it deliberately, and that makes sense to me. Next slide. Okay, mitochondrial DNA, late 1980s, you might remember this. In humans, over 99.99% of a cell's DNA is packed into the cell nucleus, with a small amount occurring outside the nucleus in small structures called mitochondria. That's these babies right here. They're about 16,000 base pairs long. Now, when you have a mixing and a mating, the DNA in the nucleus mixes. But with the mitochondrial DNA, it does not. Sperm doesn't have mitochondrial, eggs do. And so females pass it down intact generation after generation. Well, when this was figured out in the 70s, boy, the botanists and the geneticists said, great, now we can go and find out if the split from the common ancestor was closer to 8 million years or closer to 5 million years. Remember that? We're going to now pin it down. It's going to be one or the other. We're going to figure it out. So they went out and they took the mitochondrial DNA of women all around the world, every race, every creed, every culture, every country, and they brought them back to the lab and they started working on them. And when the answers came in the late 1980s, it was not 8 million years ago. It wasn't 5 million years ago. It was way the heck down to 200 to 250,000 years ago, and that's all. We don't exist genetically beyond 200 to 250,000 years. And of course, needless to say, the anthropologists said, you guys are nuts. We've got these skulls showing, these bodies showing, these prehumans showing that we go back millions of years. What's the matter with you? And the geneticists said, we couldn't have been wrong that many times. Impossible. We'll do it again. And they have. They've done it. It always comes out the same. Outside 250,000 years ago. That's it. We're brand spanking new. Brand new on this planet. Now, There's still a lot of people, there's still a lot of people that will not accept that. A lot of people that will not accept that.
Some 445,000 years ago, astronauts from another planet came to Earth in search of gold. Splashing down in one of the Earth's seas, they waded ashore and established Nibiru, home in the faraway. In time, the initial settlement expanded to a full-fledged mission Earth with a mission control center, a spaceport, mining operations, and even a way station on Mars. And there's lots of evidence of that. I mean, it absolutely is to me no coincidence. And anybody wants to make you believe it's a coincidence is a liar. That the original area of what is now Iraq, formerly Mesopotamia, was called, before it was Mesopotamia, was called Cydonia. Sorry, I had a brain fart there for a minute. And the area also on Mars where the face was found is also on Cydonia. Coincidentally enough, both places are also located on the 33rd degree parallel. Yes, you heard me right. Ancient Mesopotamia.
This is the Anunnaki, the self-proclaimed gods over mankind. This is what they look like. They are the same creatures that staged the saucer crash in 1947, the ones that were autopsied on TV. When I say stage, I mean that was the Anunnaki way of getting a double agent here on Earth to oversee and direct the Illuminati, and the Illuminati went to great expense to convince you that these creatures do not exist. The Anunnaki came to Earth right about here in our evolution and took control of our DNA. We were on our way to becoming an intelligent race with all of the promise and opportunity that the Anunnaki have enjoyed for billions of years. The Anunnaki came with one purpose in mind: how to turn the Earth into a planet that they can inhabit. The Earth was the perfect choice for the subterranean creatures with its vast underground oceans of oil. The main task would be to remove the oil, leaving hundreds of millions of square miles of underground open space for their cities. More oil is burned into the atmosphere every day than all the cars, trucks, and planes burn in 10 years. Anunnaki enslaved mankind through DNA manipulation and deception. Deception is perpetrated against all mankind by the Illuminati. The Illuminati is now carrying out thousands of attacks on mankind. Under the instruction of the Anunnaki, Satan, who is a double agent, serving the Anunnaki. This whole deception was carefully planned out and is going as planned. The Illuminati, even after all of their hatred, torment, and murder of their fellow man, they are innocent. None of us ever stood a chance against the Anunnaki deception and DNA modification. In the center of every galaxy, billions of stars, moons, planets, and everything that is compresses under such immense gravitational force, they compact to the point of matter inversion, turning matter into antimatter. When this happens, the most incredible phenomenon happens: consciousness. I think, therefore I am. This is how consciousness came to be. This is the great mathematical architect of the universe, making all life possible. The Anunnaki set up all religion as part of the deception. The reason the Anunnaki torment mankind is not because they are evil, it is because they want more than our planet and more than our slavery. They also need our dark matter souls. And when the Illuminati tortures and murders the first 4 to 6 billion humans, the Anunnaki will be waiting to intercept all of the souls. The Anunnaki use dark matter for many things. It is the most powerful substance in the universe. It is conscious, and it is God, the great mathematical architect of the universe. So the Anunnaki use the Earth as a soul trap by conditioning humans through religion to get you to give away God's greatest gift to you, your everlasting soul. The Anunnaki control matter with their minds. They can create life out of raw matter using only their minds. And if they need work done, they manipulate life forms to do the work, not machines. The Anunnaki thrive on slavery. Mankind is nothing more than a domesticated tool to the Anunnaki. They use their solar system Nibiru to travel throughout the universe and have been doing so for billions of years. Earth is being turned into a system to replace Nibiru. When Earth is completely operational and when the Illuminati has carried out a decimation of the masses, the last prophecy will be fulfilled. The Illuminati will be relocated to Nibiru, a dying hell-type planet, and the meek Anunnaki will inherit the Earth. There is a way out. Although the Anunnaki have done this to all of us, they have also given us the Bible. The simplest quote: "The truth shall set you free." If we can get out the truth about these creatures and what they are doing here and what they want from us and how they are creating religious icons to manipulate you into giving away your everlasting soul, we are all victims of the Anunnaki, including all of the religious icons that suffered as part of this manipulation. And no matter how much we love these icons, we should keep our souls free and never pledge our souls to anyone or anything.
That I brought to life a civilization that was hardly known before, and that is the Sumerian civilization. So I brought to life the Sumerian civilization, which was really a most amazing civilization. It blossomed out in what is now southern Iraq. So about 6,000 years ago, an incredible civilization appeared there, and all those that deal with it use such words as suddenly, unexpectedly, out of nowhere, because there was no gradual or any kind of precedential civilization that you had this and this and this, and this was a higher level, a higher stage. Suddenly, from what we may call primitive, though they were not primitive people, but they were farmers, hunters, etc. But suddenly there appeared cities, high-rise buildings, societal organization, kings, priests, codes of law would make wedge-like symbols or indentations in wet clay, which when it dried would become a permanent record. But let's say that this is a clay tablet, and I once held up a copy of my book, not this one, this is a DVD, and I said, which one of the two do you think would last another 1,000 years? The printed book or the clay tablet? And the answer is the clay tablet. So we have writing, which of course meant language and grammar and literature and epic tales, and lullabies were written down, recipes. So writing was one of them. Another thing was pictorial depictions. They took stones, mostly semi-precious stones, and made cylinders about an inch or so, sometimes longer, but basically about an inch, a cylinder of an inch, and would engrave, and nobody has figured out to this day how. In this hard stone, they would make an engraving in reverse, like a negative, which when rolled on wet clay would become a permanent depiction, the way we say print our presses, the rotary presses now, the newspapers. And the third thing that I would like to mention and stress this evening was the high-rise buildings. They were the first to use bricks and to build high-rise buildings like stage pyramids that would rise 100, 120, 160 or more feet high. Some think that these were the towers of Babel mentioned in the Bible. Actually, it's not so, but every major city, Sumerian city, had a sacred precinct, and the sacred precinct had such a ziggurat, as they were called. And they were used primarily for astronomical observation. And indeed, their knowledge of astronomy, or in the field of astronomy, is one of the most amazing Sumerian legacies. And this is, for example, the imprint of a cylinder seal. You can actually see the seal in Jerusalem. There's a museum there called Bible Lens Museum. And this is, if you ask a regular scholar, what is it? They'll show it. He'll say this is a beer drinking scene, because the Sumerians were also the first to invent beer. And drinking beer was a social event. You can see people are coming to participate in that. And beer was drunk through a straw. The way I understand in, say, in Latin America or in Argentina, they drink mate tea with a straw. But as many other cylinder seals, they were decorated with celestial symbols. And if you study this one, you find out that it depicts the sun, it depicts the earth and its moon, it depicts what we call the asteroid belt, which is a belt orbiting between Mars and Jupiter, and nobody knows, or nobody, I mean, I say nobody because I do. Others claim they don't know how it came about. It's the remains of some planet that was destroyed, exploded, except that if a planet explodes, the pieces fly in all directions, and in this case, they orbit like a belt between Mars and Jupiter. So you also have Mars and Jupiter. Here's Jupiter. You have the asteroid belt, which we have discovered only in modern times. And beyond Jupiter, you have Saturn and its rings, which we did not know about until the invention of the telescope. Now, this cylinder seal is from about 2000 BC, from 4,000 years ago. So this is an example of the amazing Sumerian knowledge in astronomy. But there is even one more amazing cylinder seal, which caused quite an uproar at the museum where it's kept. It's in a museum in Berlin at the time when I came across its existence. It was East Berlin, but they cooperated with me. They sent me a photograph. And if you ask scholars what is the scene depicted, they say, well, this is the god of agriculture granting the plow, a primitive plow to mankind. A representative of mankind is introduced by a lesser god to the main god who grants the plow. And just as an aside, I'll say so, you tell those same scholars at the museum or in any of their scientific magazines, say, so there was a god of agriculture and that's how he looked. They say, no, that's a mythological scene. That's just mythology. But whatever it is, there is an interesting celestial depiction on this one. And this is the long story, which I gave you as briefly as I could, of what the Bible says in chapter 2 and others of Genesis, that a group called the Elohim, which is a plural term, literally meaning the lofty ones, translated God, said to each other, let us, in the plural, let us fashion the Adam. Adam comes from Adamah, which is earth, so Adam, literally earthling. Let us fashion the earthling in our image and after our likeness. And this is essentially in one biblical verse what the Sumerian tales tell in quite a number of creation texts. And then after they achieved that and everything seemed to be in order, the deluge came and destroyed everything. So after the deluge, there are tales, by the way, Sumerian tales describing the deluge and its reasons and its what caused it and why was one God angry and said, let mankind perish, etc., etc. But that's needs another evening. So after the deluge, when the water subsided, they had to restruct and recreate and restart everything from the beginning, and they could not do it anymore in the Edin, today's Mesopotamia or Iraq, because it was all covered with millions, or now one should say billions, of tons of mud, and nothing could be done there until the earth would take generations and generations to dry. So they shifted the whole project from where it was. If you recall, it was this way. Everything was anchored on Mount Ararat, the twin peaks of Ararat, which stand out as a marker, and laid out exactly the same idea of a landing corridor this way. Now they used as one of the facilities to serve their purposes a great platform that they had built here and that survived the deluge right here. And again, using this notion of equidistance from there to the spaceport, which was here and here, to create the whole landing pattern, they chose a new mission control center, a new place for the Duran key, right here. And this place is known today as Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, and I sometimes, either at seminars or when I took groups with me to tour these places, I would say to them, why is Jerusalem sacred? I say, well, it is sacred to Muslims because the tale is that Muhammad was taken from Mecca or Medina one night on a winged horse and brought to Jerusalem, and there he was taken aloft and visited heaven for one night. So that's, but why was Muhammad taken to Jerusalem? Why wasn't he lifted just from Mecca or Medina? Well, because that place was already known as a sacred place, because the Christians believed that that's where Jesus preached and was crucified, etc. So I said, so why was Jesus crucified in Jerusalem? He was born in Bethlehem. He came from Nazareth. Why Jerusalem? Well, because that's where the temple was. The Jewish temple, the Temple of Solomon. So why was the Temple of Solomon there? Well, people don't know. So I tell them, well, it was there because the same Anunnaki who had this pattern and had Nippur as the navel of the earth and mission control center before the deluge, set up this layout and made Jerusalem Mission Control Center after the deluge. And equidistant from it is the spaceport and Twin Peaks, emulating the Twin Peaks of Ararat. Twin Peaks are here in the Sinai Peninsula, and Twin Peaks, artificial ones, because there were no mountains there. So they built two mountains known as the Giza Pyramids. Now, things did not go so well after the reconstruction and the setting up of the alternate mission control center. The Anunnaki, who, according to the tales by Enki and others, were engaged in almost constant wars. But Enlil was not the firstborn son. It was Ea, or Enki, as previously known as Ea, Enki, who was really the rightful successor, but he was demoted to rank 40, and so on. So there was a pantheon of 12, matching the 12 members of the solar system, and matching other 12 without belaboring it, 12 months of the year, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples of Jesus, and so on. So 12 was a celestial number. So the relationships were such that the conflict was almost inevitable, especially since it had a lot to do of who was mothered by whom, who was the father, who was the mother. If this one was also the son of Anu and Antu, then he was this rank. But if this one was only the son of this one, but not this queen, he had another rank. So the relationship was quite confused and convoluted, and leading to conflict, which soon appeared on Earth. And one of the events that took place, not too many, relatively too many years after the establishment of that great pattern of landing pattern in Jerusalem and the Space Force, etc., and the two artificial mountains in Egypt, was that wars broke out. And the first war that I named in my book, The Wars of Gods and Men, the Pyramid Wars, because there was a series of them, had to do with these facilities, because in the Great Pyramid, one of the two especially, which is the only one that has an ascending passage and chambers, all the others have just a descending passage, they were a prize that one side tried to deprive from the other. And the first series of pyramid wars took place there. In that particular war, the two main protagonists were the main son of Enlil, called Ninurta, and the main son of Enki, called Marduk. And in that war, it was Ninurta who was the victor, and his victory was commemorated in some cylinder seals and other depictions. This was his symbol, the eagle, and this was his victory's depiction, how he won the war over the two pyramids, and another depiction where you see actually all three pyramids. And this, by the way, is another of the proofs, of which I have many, and I deal with it extensively, of who built the pyramids and when they were built, and that you see that already in Sumerian times, which preceded the pharaonic times by thousands of years, the existence of the pyramids was already known. In one of the next wars between the various clans of the Anunnaki, the Enlilites, the Enkiites, Ninurta, Marduk, etc., they resorted to the use of nuclear weapons. In 2024, almost 4,000 years ago, the Anunnaki resorted to the use of nuclear weapons. There is a long text called the Era Epic, E-R-R-A, Epic, that describes the reasons, who did it, how they did it, what the number of nuclear weapons that were used in 2024. The unintended consequence of that was that a wind blowing from the Mediterranean brought what they called in those texts, they're called lamentation texts, they called the evil wind that brought death to everything alive in Sumer.
In Revelations, when the opening of the sixth seal comes, from what I've been told, that's very accurate, because that's exactly what's going to happen. There's going to be a massive earthquake when it locks onto us. As it goes past us, we're going to follow it right upside down. The oceans are just going to be roaring from pole to pole, as you could well guess they would, because if you take a planet that's 7,000 miles across and roll it upside down in 30 minutes, you're going to have some real serious problems with wind and water. We should be preparing to expect this thing to show up any.
A cell, you have your nuclear genes in the core, and then around in the cytoplasm you have a lot of mitochondria, and those mitochondria also have a small genome. And for sequencing, you extract your DNA out of your cell, and then you're going to fragment your DNA into small pieces, and you make a selection for a certain size range and put those pieces onto the sequencer.
Mitochondrial DNA. You find that it goes back into the range of 150,000 years based on the mitochondrial DNA, which is, I think, pretty much incontrovertible. If we're 150 to 200,000 years old, that throws a huge, gigantic wrench into the establishment position that we evolved from creatures that were walking upright approximately 4 million years ago. The early Australopithecines, Lucy, everyone is familiar with her, at around 3.2 to 3.5 million years ago, and they're finding new ones all the time. And all they say is to qualify as human is to be upright walking. If you're an upright walking pre-creature, you're called a pre-human. Even though all of those creatures, right through Neanderthal, from Lucy at 4 million years ago, right through the Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon, right up to Cro-Magnon, all of those creatures don't look anything like human beings as we are today. They are as different from us as primates. In fact, they look like primates. They look like upright walking primates. Up through Neanderthal, back to Lucy, and whatever's going to come before her. What could make something change so radically, literally overnight, in anthropological terms, and be anything remotely associated with Darwinism? I believe, personally, that the writings of the Sumerians 4,000 years ago, as chronicled by Zechariah Sitchin in his books, The Earth Chronicles, I believe that is the most logical and reasonable explanation that there is for how we came to be.
20 some odd years ago, Zechariah Sitchin wrote The 12th Planet. In The 12th Planet, he describes ancient writings and texts by the Sumerians depicting a 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru. But the Sumerians are rarely spoken about in history books. Who were the Sumerians? And what could an ancient civilization possibly know about how we came to be?
We only hear about like the Egyptians or the Mayans or the Incans, Romans, Greeks. The first culture we have on Earth were the Sumerians. And they showed up 6,000 years ago where modern-day Iraq is. It's right between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was then known as Mesopotamia, Babylon, but also Sumeria, where the first culture on Earth stems. And they have left us over 100 of the first for high society to take place. For instance, stemming from Sumeria 6,000 years ago, they were the first ones to invent writing. They had a system of over 400 characters known as cuneiform text. Then use a wedge-shaped stylus or an object with a wedge and would twist and turn and make all these characters that came up to about 400 characters. And they had their own complete language like an alphabet that we use today, A through Z. But this stemmed out of Sumeria 6,000 years ago. And all of the first for high society come from them. Time, the calendar, math, schools, courts, judges, systems of law, all of this originated in Sumeria, which was then known as Mesopotamia, Babylon, today's modern-day Iraq.
The Sumerians are actually probably the most influential culture of the ancient world. Not the Egyptians, not the Greeks, not the Romans, the Sumerians. The Sumerians invented, for example, the zodiac. All of the symbols that we still have today for the zodiac was created by the Sumerians. They tell an incredible story, the Sumerians do, of the Anunnaki, which is that there is another planet in our solar system, that gods, super beings, live on this planet, that these beings come to Earth. The Sumerians had a pantheon of gods, but it was living gods. They were the Sumerians worshipped living gods who lived and worked and had their lives among them. They were the Anunnaki. Among those Anunnaki, there were 12 leaders, 12 super gods, the bosses, the boss of bosses. Those 12 gods come down and are present in the Egyptian culture, in the Greek culture, and in the Roman culture. They just have different names, but they have basically the same personalities and the same functions. So it isn't that mythology begins with the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Mythology begins with the Sumerians. Monotheism didn't kick in until the gods, the multiple gods, actually physically left.
When we look at all the stories in the Bible about how God is a feared God, and if you do what God tells you, you are given the reprisal of going to heaven, or if you do wrong, you go to hell, and it's very black and white. But the Sumerians give us a lot more context into that line of thinking and how it came about in their image and after their likeness. The Anunnaki quoted to the Sumerians as saying, "We have created you in our image and after our likeness, and we were their slaves," basically, to do as they bid it. Mine the gold, do their daily chores. We were basically their slaves.
The leader said, "We'll make you a slave. We'll make you a servant." And that's the reason, the impetus, according again to the Sumerian writings, for the creation of human beings. The story of Noah is a classic that comes right out of the Sumerian texts. The word Eden, the Anunnaki called the land where they lived the Eden. The atom, they called the worker slave that they created the Adamu, plural.
Could the Anunnaki have genetically engineered humans? It sounds incredible until we consider that we ourselves genetically engineer the fruit and vegetables we eat every day. From tomatoes to apples and oranges to cloning Dolly the sheep. If we can genetically manipulate DNA, then who's to say that we weren't created or our DNA wasn't tampered with by another race of beings in the past? Now the question is, were we? Did they? And if we were, there must be some empirical evidence, some clues left behind, besides writing in a text, that points to this.
If you look at the human genome, you'll see that it looks very much like a primate genome, except the second and third chromosomes are fused into one. So, what does that solve? It gives you all the chromosomal material of the primate, but it's
worker to mine gold for them, to serve them. People out there, even if you're not a scholar, even if you're not anything, if you open your eyes a little bit to this and you start just doing your own research, you're going to find paths there that lead you to some things that are going to awaken new ideas into you. In the next few years, I think we're going to see a watershed of information that is going to absolutely rewrite every book of history. There's evidence left over this entire planet when you start thinking, and you must believe that we are the offspring of these people. If there was a God, the God created those people before they created us. We are here because of an act of divine creation, but they were people just like us, only older, only more technically advanced. We need to rediscover that in ourselves, that we are a great civilization. We came from a great civilization. Okay. And I would tell anybody to look, open your eyes and look for it. Don't be blinded to something that's led to nothing but the slaughter of ourselves for thousands of years. And we still are at that point. We're still a warring society. When this documentary or others like it are put out there and enough people will see it, at least that will start a beacon somewhere. That will.
Okay, but what about Planet X?
Oh, it's a reality.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what are they going to do about that?
Well, apparently they are concerned about, you know the story, according to Sitchin and according to the Sumerians, it's a reality. Well, our astronomers apparently have concluded that it is indeed a reality. For almost a century, astronomers have been concerned and interested about what they called an intruder that seems to come and go from time to time, and they can measure it by the perturbations and the effects on other planets. They've known its existence for a long time, but they've never gone public about it. Well, in the early 80s, the JPL, the guys at
Jet Propulsion,
used to call it Jack Parsons Laboratory.
Yes.
Which I think is probably where the original JPL came from.
Yes.
Because Jack Parsons established it. Anyhow, they sent out a couple of Pioneers satellites back in '82 just to try to determine if there was some truth to it. Mm-hmm. And the Pioneers apparently came back with data which said not only yes, but hell yes. And the Pioneers concluded, the Pioneer satellite data concluded. So, wow, astronomers were troubled by that. Whew. Could this thing be real? And well, what did they do? They sent out what they called an infrared astronomical satellite. I think they called it IRAS, anyhow, and this was done in '83. They sent the IRAS out, taking infrared pictures all around the ecliptic, above and below. And apparently IRAS got two giant positive responses that yes, the 12th planet, the 10th planet, however you want to call it, yes, it's real. And that's when the lid slams down.
So it's out there, it's on its way back in, right?
According to the Sumerians in Sitchin, apparently it is. And if you're a student of history, as one of my majors, its last pass was 1600 BC. The Sumerians and Sitchin and all of those say it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Mm-hmm. So as like many of us, you know, I count on my fingers and toes and figure out, well, 1600 BC, it has an orbit of 3,600 years. Wow! It's due. Well, apparently it is.
So
now,
why are they keeping this a secret?
Because
you're an expert on secrets.
Listen, every time Nibiru would make a pass, it was not always devastating. Mm-hmm. It would depend on whether the planet Earth and Nibiru were on the same side of the sun at the same time. Mm-hmm. And if we were on the same side of the sun at the same time, all hell would break loose on planet Earth. Well, apparently, last pass triggered the explosion of Santorini, Thera, the volcano in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean Sea, blew its top, brought to a close the great, great Minoan civilization. Among other things, it affected Egypt. It's all in the records, apparently. There are even historians and theologians who say that Santorini's explosion is exactly what you're reading about when the plagues and all hit Egypt that allowed Moses to get the Israelites out. But if you look at 1600 BC and figuring that was a relatively recent pass, it's due now, and apparently the guys in the astronomical observatories know it. And that, again, is above top secret. Let me give you a tiny example. For a number of years ago, there were two brilliant guys working at the Naval Observatory in Washington. Tom Van Flandern is one, who I hope you've interviewed.
No, but yeah, please continue, and we'd love to do that.
He's no longer with the Naval Observatory. The other one was the chief astronomer at the observatory, a brilliant man by the name of Robert Harrington.
Right.
And Harrington gave an interview to Zechariah Sitchin a number of years ago. I think it was 91 or so. Mm-hmm. Where he came right out and said, Dr. Sitchin, we are interested in this because it ties in perfectly with the work you've done on the Sumerians and the ancient planet Nibiru. He said, we found it, it's real, we have photographs of it, and he says from what we can put together, it's a rather nice planet. It's about 2.5 times the size of the Earth. Apparently it's heading toward the system, the center of the system. We've concluded about everything about it except that we haven't named it. And Zechariah spoke up and he says, it's already been named. He says, you simply call it Nibiru, as the Sumerians called it, the planet of the crossing. Mm-hmm. Well, Mrs. Sitchin and I were in agreement. I miss her. She died about a year ago. Mm. She was convinced that Robert Harrington had died because somebody bumped him off, because he had the courage to come out and give Zechariah this interview. I don't know whether you've seen it or not. It's on tape.
No, I haven't seen it, but we interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about this subject, and he's also talked about Robert Harrington.
Yeah, well, Harrington gave the interview to Zechariah, and it's on a video called Are We Alone? And I think you can pick it up at the conference here next week.
Okay.
I have a copy, and I sent a copy to Neil Freer, who's a man you should interview.
Okay, well, we're in touch with Neil. He's a very interesting guy.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's a brilliant guy.
He's brilliant. He just recently came out and admitted that he's had a an intimate interrelationship with extraterrestrial intelligence since he was a child.
Well, he's always talking about the Anunnaki. I do know this.
Well, he wrote a book called Breaking the Godspell.
Mm-hmm.
And he has supported Zechariah's work for years.
I have a question, Bobby, if I may, about the provenance of this information, in the sense that Zechariah Sitchin's work is very well documented, and a lot of people watching this video will be very familiar with his books and with all the intelligent commentary about that. Are you saying that you have additional information based on your contacts within the Old Boys Network, or are you doing a neat presentation of...
Many of my conclusions are my own, you know, and they, in many respects, correlate perfectly with Sitchin's work, which is, you know, Neil has told me, he says, you know, Zechariah really should get the Nobel Prize. But I don't know what they would grant it to him in what field. But he's such an outstanding scholar in what he's done, and the Earth Chronicles is what he calls all of his work. Well, I think there's 7 or 8 of them now.
I have 2 questions. One's a minor one to do with celestial mechanics. And it's just something that I've never understood, and I've heard this question from many other people as well. That if Nibiru comes from the outer reaches of the solar system, it's going to be an icy rock, which isn't going to be the kind of place that any beings could live on or would want to live on. And researcher Andy Lloyd, who you probably have heard about, has theorized that what they're seeing in the photographs that you referred to as an orange object is actually a brown dwarf, with the possibility of Nibiru being one of its moons, if you like. And there's a lot of debate about how to apply what Sitchin seems to have been saying to the real practicalities of life on an icy rock out in the orbit of Pluto. And I wondered if you knew or had anything to say about that.
No, it's not an icy rock. And yes, when it makes its long journey out and back, it gets so far away from the sun that the sun is probably no more than a little tiny prick of light, a little tiny pinpoint. And if you would think that it would be naturally icy cold. No, apparently the planet, like many planets in the system here, generate its own heat. It has in its core a generating heat system very much like our own. We have a system within the core of this planet that has been described as a thermonuclear reaction, very similar to the sun. Now, most of the life and all of the bounty and all of the beauty of life on this planet comes from our going around this beautiful sun. But I don't think Nibiru is an icy rock. No, I think, first of all, that it probably generates enough of its own heat, and I think they probably did indeed create for themselves, with the advanced technology that they have, a kind of a Dyson sphere. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. You know what brilliant British astronomer, I think, Freeman Dyson, said some years ago, that an incredibly advanced technology will have the ability to enclose its planet and retain not only its heat, but its atmosphere. Technology will ultimately do the same, simply because it makes sense. It's a practical thing.
But if they had that degree of engineering capability, why wouldn't they just live on Mars instead of hurtling through the solar system?
Well, they weren't the original occupants of Mars. They used Mars as a way station, and they've reactivated it, and I agree with Zechariah on that they've reactivated their way system, their way station there. They used to drop off on Mars on their way here. So they were never, I don't think, original inhabitants of Mars. There are a few remnants of original inhabitants on Mars, There's even some indications, which I've been looking into, and I've gotten some data, that we're playing host to a bunch of Martians here on this planet.
Of a sudden stratospheric warming that has split our polar vortex in two, which I think is pretty cool. The polar vortex, which forms and deepens as the atmosphere loses heat into space in the darkness of the long Arctic winter night, was split in two by massive heating from below. A series of intense storms in the North Pacific intensified a very long wave in the upper atmosphere. Energy on that planet-sized wave went upwards from the lower atmosphere around the Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau and broke into the stratosphere, causing a major sudden warming. It rapidly reversed the strong cyclonic winds in the stratosphere around the poles, creating a central dome, breaking the vortex into two smaller vortices. It's actually quite incredible. Now, what caused this sudden heating? And I'll make sure to put up pictures on my site because I forgot. But some pretty major things are taking place on this great good Earth. Wonderful pictures so we can see it splitting, of course. Major stratospheric warnings have taken place on average every other year over the past 50 years. The physics of these warnings is very complicated. Since 1998, these warnings have been frequent and earlier in the winter. Previously, major warmings typically happened in February. Over the past decade, they have happened in December and January as well, but this one is exceptional on every count I've seen so far. This stratospheric warning is apparently the strongest ever observed in the first half of January, according to NOAA. No one knows why the number of major warmings is increasing, but a correlation has been made between positive sea surface temperature anomalies and active phase of the polar cycle. Even though the sun is very active, but it's active on the side away from us. This year, the sun should be very active, and it is active, it's just we're not getting as many end flares as we really need. And there are large positive sea surface temperature anomalies in the North Indian Ocean and the Northwest Pacific.
First, and his background, he was born in Palestine before it became Israel. He learnt ancient Hebrew as a young child and studied the Bible. Just give you a quick example. When in the Bible it refers to giants on the land, well, if that had been interpreted properly, it would have said those from above. So this guy has, obviously researched it. He's read clay tablets from Sumerians, and they are the most, they were the most advanced. And basically he's saying that Nibiru, comes around every 3,600 years, goes around the sun in between Mars and Jupiter. And when it's nearby, stuff happens. And there's an intelligent society living on the planets there, and there's times when it's close to sort of jumping over to Earth and da-da-da-da. Now, it seems possible that the last time they were here, 3,600 years ago, there was a big battle going on with their peoples. And, you know, you can see evidence of this in the Bible in Ezekiel. And what I just thought, which seems to make sense of the world we're living in today, is that after the battle, after Nibiru was on its way out again, some of their people were left behind on Earth, and they may well have been the bad guys. Well, I think, so this is going to be my standpoint, that the ones who were left behind were the bad guys. Now maybe they were somehow locked away or something, but it could be that these bad guys then laid a plan for the next time that Nibiru comes around, and is why they've taken on us humans as a slave race to advance technology to a stage where they can fight the, I think they're calling them the Anunnaki, as they come back round. Now let's just take nuclear weapons. They were well in time for that. I've just seen that Russia has 8,800, America has 7,500, and you know, that's a lot of nuclear weapons to have when, you know, it'd only take a couple to finish off a country. Well, you know, why would you need 8,000 nuclear weapons capable of being fired halfway across the world? So if they're capable of being fired halfway, are the bad guys, and they're going to make us fight the Anunnaki. Now possibly there isn't enough of them. Maybe they've wanted to keep their race clean and not have too much human DNA in them, and perhaps their numbers are relatively small and wouldn't have a hope of defeating the incoming Anunnaki, the good guys. And the reason I'm saying they're the good guys and the ones left here are the bad guys is, you know, the way we are treated in this world. We've been fooled and hypnotized and everything else, and we're not given the truth. And to me, that's the biggest thing, is truth. You know, you build your whole foundation of your mindset on what you consider to be truths. It is important. So, yeah, the bad guys are here, and they're going to make us think that the other guys are the bad guys with all their hypnotism and shit. But we just have to know inside ourselves that that's not the case, and don't help them. Right? So I think from now on, you know, the code is, do not help the evil ones in power. Do not aid and assist them. Do not fight in their wars. So yeah, some of you may think I'm mad, but Nibiru for me is always, there was always something about it just made sense. Just seemed to slot in and make a lot of sense. And what with all the earth changes going on at the moment, everything that's being predicted, you know, just happens to be happening. Yeah? All at the same time. And we're seeing signs now of nation turning against nation and kingdom turning against kingdom. Egypt and Ethiopia arguing over the Nile. India and Pakistan, well, they're always at it. North and South Korea. There'll be one around the corner, quite likely. So, you know, things are happening. Plagues, weather, tornadoes, volcanoes, earthquakes. And that makes me believe that Nibiru is coming now. That's why I think it's happening now. There's saw some evidence today to show that, you know, the Nibiru's passing is a sort of a 7-year thing. I mean, this particular thing said it may have started in 2007. So maybe it did. Maybe this has been going on.
I know you are.
Are you seeing this?
Affirmative.
Anne's 40-year-old husband, Tom, died 2 years ago in January, and she believes his death was due to a contagious illness that has infected her entire family.
Tell me what you believe is happening on your skin. It's like fibers that come out of your skin?
Yes, there's this fibrous material. It's in layers.
I look at your arm.
Our hands swell and they itch and...
It's been described as feeling as if either bugs are crawling on the surface of your skin or underneath your skin.
Both horrifying and fascinating. From here in Florida to the Bay Area, something seems to be causing a mysterious new disease.
In my mind, an engineer that sacrificed himself with this virus and it created this horrific...
What we thought we knew is just a tiny tributary of what's actually going on. We'll find out who this was. They are not gods.
They say out of slow-healing skin lesions will come bizarre filaments.
We are now mapping.
Those engineers made something they shouldn't have.
We know that there is something real going on here.
Where did he come from?
Paradise.
Take us home! If you don't stop it, there won't be any home to go back to!
Big things have small beginnings.